Irashaimase. Hello and welcome to Fitaurus Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fitaurus. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday. And on the menu this Saturday, we have Earth Atlantis, the aquatic side-scroller for the Nintendo Switch. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. From developer Pixel Perfect, Earth Atlantis released on the Nintendo Switch in October of 2017. Let's dive into the ingredients. So the base is a Defender-style side-scroller. You've got the ability to turn your ship facing either left or right, and then we have a big side of open world. So you're going and exploring this relatively large map, and you can do this just by, well, flying your ship, or rather, sailing your ship through the ocean waters. And then we have that added spice of that old sketching visual style. And the developers wanted this to look a little bit like those 14th century drawings where the explorers of the time kind of viewed the ocean as something scary and terrifying, full of monsters and danger. And I feel that the visual style does do a good job of capturing that. In Earth Atlantis, we have two game modes we can play in. Quest mode, where we'll battle through the game's 25 bosses in a somewhat particular order, and we can also continue in this mode. And then there's Hunter mode, which is unlocked by completing quest mode. Here we have a set amount of energy or time, and we're looking to defeat as many bosses as we can in that time. We have 4 possible player ships, starting with one default and unlocking the others throughout the course of gameplay. We start with the Nautilus, the Hunter. The next ship is the Argonaut, the Scavenger. Then we have the Moby Dick, the Mercenary. And lastly, the Musashi, the Warrior. Each ship has its own unique attacks. In addition to that, there are several power-ups we can obtain. By defeating regular enemies, we can occasionally obtain P power-ups, which will power up our main weapon, and also plus power-ups if we've taken damage to refill our health. And then there are 4 sub-weapons we can obtain. These are obtained by defeating bosses or opening crates. And the 4 sub-weapons are the E, the Electro Beam. This is a weapon that's short range but will fire electric beams that home in on enemies within a close range to you. We have the M, the Torpedo Missile. The Torpedo Missile is just a slow fire rocket that does deal heavy damage. There's the H, the Homing Missile. This will fire 2 to 4 homing missiles depending on how many power-ups you've collected that just basically home in on the enemies. And B, the Bouncing Bomb. These will bounce around the screen, off of walls, and deal really heavy damage when they hit enemies, but they're relatively inaccurate, so it's hard to effectively use them. All that blended together gives us Earth Atlantis. So let's take a quick moment to play through the game itself and see a little bit of how everything comes together. So I'm playing in Hunter mode, which, as I mentioned, is one where we have a set amount of time to move around the map and fight the bosses. So the basic progression is, in Hunter mode, you'll start at one of the game's particular start points. In Quest mode, you can use those start points as continue points, so throughout the course of the game, you'll be making your way to new continue points and being able to continue your game from that point. So the basic progression that we're looking for is, as we start out at base power. So, and this includes when you continue. So you're looking to move around the enemy, find an area where, or rather move around the map, find an area where lots of basic enemies spawn, grind for a little bit to increase your power, and then make your way to one of the several boss fights in the game. So we should be coming up to that shortly. So there are 25 total bosses in the game, but in addition to those 25 bosses, we also have several events. There are 9 events, and then we also have the 4 enemy ships, which is how you unlock the additional ships in the game. So you'll encounter enemies that are labeled the Hunter, the Scavenger, the Mercenary, and the Musashi. Defeat those ships and you'll unlock, well, you don't unlock the Nautilus as you have that, but then you'll unlock the Argonaut, the Moby Dick, and the Musashi. And that's basically the way that the game goes and works, is we will move around, grind. If we happen to take damage, then we'll grind for HP, and potentially also grind for power if we've lost some facing the bosses. As if we take enough damage, we'll start to go and lose our power-ups. Kind of frustrating, but it's just the way that the game is. So here we're on to the second boss that we're fighting in Hunter mode, the Siren. Each boss defeated gives us a huge amount of time, but we also gain time or stars from the smaller enemies we fight as well. Usually like just 1 star for a second, and it's also possible to find treasure chests in addition to the crates that are around that hold power-ups as well. So as I was mentioning, we can collect our sub-weapons from either the crates or the bosses that we encounter. So far we've had the M, which are just the torpedo missiles. We've just picked up the E, the Electro Beam, and we're on to our third boss, the Colossus. Took a hit there early in the fight that knocked one of our power-ups out of us, and yeah, that's just frustrating. When fighting bosses as well, we do need to be careful not to run into the mines that are scattered all around the edge of the areas where we fight the bosses. They will deal heavy damage to us. So the story that's present in Earth Atlantis is basically a climate apocalypse happened, and now like 95% of the Earth is covered in water. Great, what do we got? We've already had M. And so humanity, civilization's basically like a shell of what it once was, and machines have taken on these marine shapes now, and well, they're the terrors of the sea. So we play the role of a hunter going around defeating all these large enemies, and hence the name of the mode, Hunter Mode. So we've basically seen the main cycle of gameplay. We defeat bosses, move around the map to the next boss while grinding for HP and power-ups. And sweet, and here we have an event as well. We have to defeat 30 of these angelfish as they fire these crescent moons at us. Appropriately, this particular event is named Sailor's Moons. I quite like that name for, well, just what it's alluding to there. So, some of the biggest problems I have, the minus flavors with Earth Atlantis. The gameplay just gets tedious too fast. As we begin to play the game, there's a huge amount of backtracking involved. Less so in Hunter mode than in the main quest mode. In Hunter mode, all the blocks, there's like certain blockers that keep you from exploring the full map. All those have been removed, but in quest mode, until you defeat certain bosses or finish certain events, those blockers are in place, limiting you to being able to explore only set parts of the game's map. And so you're basically going to one side of the map, defeating a boss, and then having to backtrack all the way across the map to get to the next boss. This could have been made so much easier, so much better if they just added in a way to warp between the checkpoints in the game itself. I'm fine without the warp in the Hunter mode as it changes things out and it's all this race, but in the main game itself it just becomes this unpleasant slog that you don't enjoy doing. So there's the grind, there's the backtracking, there's not really much variety to our gameplay either. It's just move around the map and fight the bosses. The visual style is so interesting, but I feel it's squandered on what we have. There's also the problem with cheap kills. A lot of times you're battling enemies that are the bosses and keeping them off screen, but some of them can charge at you, and if you're not 100% aware of where they're at, there's a high likelihood they'll crash into you and you will die. It's just not fun. This boss right here is a great example. If we're hit by that tentacle that's coming up from the sea floor, one hit will kill us. So those complaints that I have, like losing the power-ups when we go and take hits, getting quick killed by enemies, definitely far outweigh the plus flavors this time. But the plus flavors are worth taking note. So the biggest one is the game's graphic style. I really like this old sketch visual style that they came up with. It does capture the feeling that they were looking for, and that's something that definitely needs to be noted. In addition to that, I love games that give us additional player ships that are unique and different from your base ship. It adds fun ways to potentially play and explore the game, though to be honest, once you've unlocked the Musashi, there's really no need to go and play as any other ship, as the Musashi is the most powerful and fastest one there is. So, there we have it. Earth Atlantis served up for your enjoyment. Overall, I feel that the flavor of Earth Atlantis is just too bland. You have that bright burst of taste and flavor when you first sink into it, but once you actually sit down and play the game for a little bit of time, after a few bites, it's just become the same bland, repetitive thing over and over again. So it is one of the unique titles that is only available on the Switch. But at this point in time, there are so many other shoot 'em ups on there that I would recommend looking at first before you try out Earth Atlantis. Well, that'll just about wrap up this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. I want to thank you so much for coming out and joining me this week. And as always, I hope to see you again next week.